Hello there, YouTube community, and welcome back to another episode of Across the Oceans. My name is Matthias here in Zurich.
And I'm James in Miami.
And in today's episode, we'll share with you our tips and tricks on how you can achieve cinematic looking footage with your action cams. Coming up. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in again in today's Across the Oceans episode. Hi, James. How are you, mate? How is it over there in Miami?
Hey, buddy. Doing good, man. Doing good. You know, winter is over here, and we're fully spring has sprung.
Good times. Good times. So it's time to share some more of our knowledge, I guess, today, and give our viewers out there a few more tips and tricks on how they can get the best out of their action cams when it comes to filming underwater. And for today, we've picked the topic of making your underwater shots more cinematic. Now, both of us, we've been using action cams for quite a while for different projects as well, so we've got quite a bit of experience when it comes to, using a few tips and tricks here and there to get the best out of those tiny little cameras. I know that you, James, you've been using your GoPros for probably as long as you can remember, right?
Yeah, I've pretty much been through the whole sequence. I don't think I've had every single iteration, but I was definitely an early adopter, and I've got the most recent one here, and I've probably had 7 in between. So yeah, big fan.
Excellent. So I would actually like to just pass the word over to you and listen into what your tips are on getting the most cinematic looking footage when using your GoPro underwater.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, buddy. I think this is like a really nice series that we're building around the action cameras because they are such a fantastic tool for beginner filmmakers. And if you've watched the other episodes in Across the Ocean in the series, you know that we're sort of trying to build our way through to making you guys a more complete filmmaker using the action cameras. So the next logical step after having talked about our settings, and I'm going to refer back to last month's episode a bit when it comes to my tips for cinematic shooting underwater, really this is the next iteration is, okay, you've got your settings done, you're in the water, now you need to actually film. How are you going to go about doing that? So I've got 5 tips for in-water shooting, and then I'll pass it back to you, Matthias, because I know that you're going to follow up with how to actually manage what you shoot underwater a little bit more. So tip number 1 is, of course, you want the most stable footage that you can manage, and that's something that action cameras excel at. They're meant to be beaten up, thrown around, strapped to mountain bikes, jumped out of airplanes. So stabilization is a really big thing that action cameras focus on, and they give you a number of good tools. So I know that the DJI Osmo that Matthias favors has a rock steady setting. For GoPro, it's called Hyper Smooth, but that's also not really enough. You can get more stable footage by either using a tripod or a monopod or some kind of handheld device that you can plant in the sand or attach to a wreck with a clip, and really make sure that your camera has the minimum amount of shake possible. Shaky footage looks bad. There are no exceptions to that rule. There is never a time when shaky footage looks good. Blair Witch Project style doesn't really work from a high quality cinematic appeal, all right? So let's try and get the most stable footage possible and really concentrate on how you can physically manage the camera underwater, how you're mounting it to get the best stable shots that you can muster. So that's point number 1, avoid camera shake. Number 2 is make sure that you're shooting at a resolution and frame rate that allows you to produce cinematic results in post. So we talked about this a little bit in settings, but you want a frame rate of at least 60. And the reason that we do that, and I didn't really go into this when we talked about settings last time, if we've got 60 frames per second, we can slow that down to 24 frames per second in our editing suite and create a slow motion effect. But it's not a slow motion, it's just a nice, smooth, buttery feel of motion. So when you've got fish swimming, when you've got turtles swimming, their motion looks a lot smoother and a lot more fluid. So as I said in last month's video, make sure you've got those settings accurate, and that's going to help you produce more cinematic results. Tip number 3 is avoid macro. If you're shooting with an action camera, macro is really not the way to go. And yes, I know there are a number of options out there where you can bolt on some kind of a macro lens to your action camera, but you're always going to be disappointed with the results. If you've been inspired by macro videographies that get these tack sharp videos of a little goby in a brain coral just sticking its tiny little head out, and it's pinpoint focus on the eye of the minute little fish, and you want to aspire to that, you're going to have to spend more than $350. You're going to have to get a proper macro setup. So just don't waste your time doing it, because I think you're going to be more disappointed with the results. Avoid macro is tip number 3. Tip number 4 is mix your shots up. What I mean by that is shoot different angles. You'll often see a sequence of different shots of underwater video, and it's all shot like this. So you've got reef, and then some reef, and then some reef, and that gets boring real quick, and boring is not cinematic. So one of the beautiful things about these cameras is they're tiny, they're small. You can put them inside a crack of a wreck or behind a coral and have it shooting up through a brain coral and have the diver swim behind it. So get creative with where you put the camera and shoot different angles. Shoot silhouetted against the sun, shoot from the top down, shoot side on, shoot funky weird angles, and you know, play with the horizon and get creative. That's one of the beautiful things about these. Don't forget to get an establishing shot when you're at the surface and show as much of the dive site as wide as possible to sort of establish your scene. So really use these things to their maximum potential by getting different angles and shooting in different ways. And then when you chop them all together, you're going to have a nice cinematic sequence that's varied and interesting. And then tip number 5 is to make sure that you're shooting in a flat color profile. If your camera gives you the option, always have it set to whatever the flattest is. And by flattest, we mean the highest dynamic range. And what that does is, while the footage will come out of the camera looking kind of pale and grayer, what it's done is preserved more color detail, particularly in the highlights and the shadows. So when you go into the editing, you have more room for color grading. And I think that's pretty much where your tips pick up. So I'm going to pass the ball back to you because I need to take a breath. That's basically it.
Thank you very much,
I think I did
James.
all that on one breath. I don't know. Did I?
It's the diver's ability of just keep talking without having to take another breath. Awesome, fantastic. I'm very happy to take over here, but before I do, and I'm gonna talk a little more so you can actually catch your breath, but I've got a question for you to one of the topics or one of the tips that you mentioned.
Tell me.
All of them, fantastic. I would pick all the same tips. What really interests me is when you talked about the different angles, filming in different angles and stuff. Do you actually pre-plan what you want to film when you go down, or do you just take your camera and just take it by chance, whatever comes across or whatever you come across or whatever happens down there? How is your approach there? That would really interest me personally because
Yeah, both. I mean, if the dive site is known to me, if it's a wreck or a reef that I'm intimately familiar with, I'll probably have some good ideas of what I want to shoot. If I'm doing a product shoot, for example, if I'm shooting for example, a dive computer, and I'm trying to film the dive computer, I want photos of the dive computer from as many different angles, or shots of the dive computer from as many different angles as possible. But then I'm also going to play to what situation I'm in. So to use that example, I was filming a new dive computer a little while ago, and there were just tons of stingrays at this dive site we were at. It was just a sandy, reefy patch, and there were stingrays everywhere. So I was able to get my hand down on the sand as the stingray was feeding and get a shot looking down my arm with the computer with a stingray kind of just flapping around in front of it, and that looked really cool. I couldn't have planned that in advance because I didn't know the stingrays were going to be there. So little things like that where you kind of like, okay, I want the establishing shots, but I know I want variety, and I know there are rules that are there to be broken. You know, like people always say, oh, don't shoot silhouettes, don't shoot against the sun. Why not? As long as you don't do all of that, take a little bit and it can look kind of cool. One of my favorite things to do is put this down in the sand and swim over the top of it, particularly if there's a product feature. Fins are great for that, computers are great for that, anything that you can get in there and have that kind of looking up with the sun behind and silhouetted. That's great. You wouldn't want to watch a whole sequence of that, but break rules and get creative. So yeah, I have a plan. I have a general idea of some of the main shots. I know I want an establishing shot. I know what the subject is going to be if it's a product that I'm taking specifically with me to shoot. But I also allow the environmental conditions to get as creative as possible as well. So a little bit of both. Yes, I have a plan, and yes, I improvise.
Oh, excellent. That was kind of what I was expecting to get as an answer from you. Thank you very much for explaining that a little more in detail. I couldn't agree more. I also think that rules are here to be broken, and we can only just ever get better and try new things by breaking rules and seeing what works and what doesn't. It's in the end, it's a trial and error thing for very many things. Yes, there's certain things that you should stick to, but there's a lot of things that you can bend, maybe even break a little and see what kind of results you can get out of it that way. Right, so let's pick up from where we left with the flat picture profile, and you've explained already why we want to do this. Simply that we have more leeway for color correcting and creating a specific look with our images in post-production. Now, something else that we also should do, or I think that we should do with the edit, or to get edit stability, you said use the rock steady or the hyper smooth that our action cameras give us. Maybe even film in higher frame rate so we can get a bit of a smooth shot or smooth looking shot that way when we bring it into post-production. But also we can use our stabilizing tools that are integrated in our post-production software. Whether you're using DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro 10 or Premiere Pro, all of these tools, they have some stabilization tools integrated in them, and you can use those to actually make your footage look more stable, and I highly recommend it. For most parts, it doesn't work always. If you've got a very shaky shot, it might not work, but nowadays these tools are really good, and they do a very good job in stabilizing your footage. Another thing that I strongly recommend is to actually color correct and color grade your footage once you've put it onto your computer, imported it into your editing software, because that's where you're really gonna make your footage look different to all the other stuff that is being seen out there. Simply by correcting the colors, if for whatever reason you didn't get your white balance correct, you can actually do quite a bit with most editing softwares nowadays, and also with most codexes that you bring into the editing software. You can correct that fairly well. We'll look at how this is done in a later episode, a little more in detail. And you can also create a look by giving your footage or applying what is called a LUT, a lookup table, onto your footage that will give your footage a very distinctive look. If you want to create a specific mood or something, you can actually do that very easily, I would say, in your post-production software. Another thing that will help make your footage look more cinematic without even having to do anything at all is by adding the widescreen bars. And we know that from cinema, right? If you're in the movies and you're watching a Hollywood movie, most of the time these movies will not be shown in the 16:9 aspect ratio, but they will have a ratio that is a lot more in the length, right? So it's going to be much narrower. And this is, for some reason, we associate that look to be more cinematic. Whether that is true or not is not part of this discussion, but when we see a piece of film that is shown in a more narrow or wider aspect ratio, it seems to us that it is more cinematic. And we can achieve that very simply. With most editing softwares, it's like a drag and drop function, and you can add the widescreen bars onto your footage and make it look a little more cinematic very, very easily. And last but not least, this is also for me an important part, and one part that I would not miss on any of my productions is integrating music that actually fits the mood of the images, and also sound effects to just create that specific mood that you want to create with that piece of film that you're creating. Now, this is also a thing that we'll talk a little more in detail in a future episode, where James and I get our music from, how we actually pick music, and how we make sure that the music that we do pick actually fits into the film, the project that we're creating at that very moment. Right, so those are my tips to keep it fairly brief when it comes to sort of the portion after we've shot the clips in the water and we bring it into the editing software. Little tips and tricks on what we can do to make the final product look a little more cinematic. Any add-ons, James?
No, I think that's awesome.
Out of breath.
No, I think that's awesome, and I think we're along for the journey now, and we seem to be moving into the editing suite now. We've got our cinematic shots that we've captured underwater. Is that what we're going to do next episode? Are we ready to move into editing?
Yes, I agree, James. I think that's exactly what we should do. I think our next step should be to dive into the editing part of things. And as some of you who have been watching my channel know, that I have been a Final Cut Pro 10 user for the longest time being. I know that you, James, you are a Premiere Pro user, right?
Adobe all the way, man.
All the way, excellent. So we've got two different platforms that we can dive into with you guys, and we can share our editing process with you there. And that's exactly what we're gonna do in the next episode. Do you have anything else to add today?
No, just thanks again, guys, for coming on this journey with us. Really appreciate it. Thanks for everyone who's commenting on the videos and going along with this sort of collaborative. And thanks again to you, Matthias, because every time we record one of these episodes, I learn something from you. So I know that we're providing value to our viewership, and I really appreciate it. So good to see you, mate. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Likewise here. And yes, please guys, do put your comments down in the comment section, in particular for the next episode. If you're looking at learning something specific in the editing process, or if there's something that interests you in particular, please let us know down in the comment section below. And to make sure that you're not missing out on that upcoming episode, if you haven't subscribed to our channels, please make sure to do that as well. They will be, as always, linked down in the video description below. And there's not much more for me to say than to wish you guys a beautiful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and do a lot of diving. And we will see you in the next episode.
Take care.
All right.
Hold on.
Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in to today's...
Hang on. I got shit in my eye. Feel like a hair.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
Yeah.
Blub, 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 blub.
Blub, blub, blub.
We'll take you through a bit of our editing process. I know that you, James, you do your editing in not in Final Cut. That's me. Sorry. No, I do my editing in Final Cut.
I do mine in
You
Premiere
do your
Pro.
editing